Hey, Pastor Josh here. We have come to Exodus chapter 8, verses 16 through 32. And we see here that God does make a distinction. He makes a distinction between his people and those that are not his people. Essentially, a difference between his friends and his enemies. We see this quite clearly with the people of Israel and the Egyptians. We come now into plague number 3 and plague number 4. Both of these plagues involve insects. And also, what is important to remember or to point out is that our plagues are kind of grouped in 3 sets of 3, within the final plague being the one threatening to kill to kill the firstborn son of the Egyptians. So you have 3 sets of 3. So we're ending the first set of 3, and then we begin the second set of 3. I'll point out that a little bit more when we get to plague number 4. But God does indeed make a distinction between his people and his enemies. So let's jump into our reading. Third plague is now gnats. If you remember, the Lord had just made frogs come up and fill the land of Egypt. There are frogs everywhere. And Pharaoh requested that Moses would pray that the frogs would go away. Moses says, "You tell me when." Pharaoh says, "Tomorrow." Silly thing to ask, but he says tomorrow. Then the frogs go away. Pharaoh promised that he would let the people go, but he doesn't do that. Verse 16. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth so that it may become gnats in all the land of Egypt." This one is unannounced. Number 1 was announced. Number 2 was announced, even giving Pharaoh an opportunity to let the people go and worship. Pharaoh says no. Now this one is unannounced. So now there's gnats all over the place. Verse 17, and they did so. Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff. Again, we see the instrument by which Aaron and Moses are doing these things is through the instrumentality of God. God is using the staff. God is using Moses and Aaron to do these things. And he struck the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and beast. All the dust of the earth became gnats in all the land of Egypt. The magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but guess what? They could not. The magicians could not make gnats. So there were gnats on man and beast. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." The magicians are now recognizing this is really a real person, and this is real strong power that we are dealing with. Up to this point, the magicians had been able to duplicate these plagues that were happening. Their staffs were able to turn into snakes. They were able to turn the water into blood. And then they were able to make frogs come up out of the Nile River. But to make sand turn into gnats, they could not do. And they are recognizing that God is God. Indeed, one day all knees will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And I pray that that is done for folks before they die, that they will receive Jesus as Lord. But either way, whether they go to their grave rejecting God forever, they will recognize that God is God and God is strong. So here we see God making a distinction. He's not making a distinction at this point. He will in just a moment. Gnats are all over the place. But notice Pharaoh's reaction. His heart was hardened. Of course, that is a action we want to avoid. We do not want to harden our hearts against the Lord, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. Now we see the 4th plague. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Rise up early in the morning and present yourself to Pharaoh as he goes out to the water." Now this is interesting. As he goes out to the water, each set of these 3 sets of plagues begin with Moses encountering Pharaoh while he is at the Nile River in the morning. What we would understand to be kind of his morning bath. It is him getting ready in the morning. And the 3, so the 1st plague, the 4th plague, and the 7th plague all begin in this way, rising up in the early, The first one's mentioned that he's at the water. The seventh one doesn't. But there is this encounter with Pharaoh while he is in the Nile, and we saw that the first plague was actually against the Nile River, causing there to be blood all over the place. And so this is, if you will, this is Pharaoh. Remember, I've talked about his headdress and his crown having that snake on the top of it. You can even see this as him kind of being a crocodile that is here in the water. He is owning his water. He is the god of the water, of the Nile. And here is God approaching him through God's servants and is ultimately coming to destroy him, coming to tear him down. So Pharaoh is going out to the water, and Moses is to say to him, "Thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. Or else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants and your people and into your houses." So this one is announced and even given Pharaoh an opportunity to let the people go and worship. "And the houses of the Egyptians shall be filled with swarms of flies, and also on the ground on which they stand. But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen." So here we see the distinction of God. The first three, there are no distinctions. Now there begins to be a distinction between the people of God and the Egyptians. And this is a promise that was made to Pharaoh for the Israelites. It's a promise for us too. God treats Christians differently than he treats those who are not his people. There's a special type of love for those that are Christians than those that are not Christians. Those that are Christians will spend eternity with God forever. Those who are not Christians will spend an eternity in hell. There is a distinction. Now, that does not mean that these folks right here, the ones that are enemies of God, they are more than welcome and free to come into this family if they so choose. But if they choose to stay away, then there will always be a distinction from them. And so that promise still lasts today. There's a distinction between God's people and those who are not his people. There will always be a distinction. We always need to remember that. That's why we ask people to come to Jesus so that they can receive the benefits of being a Christian and being with Christ. So God says, I'm going to set a distinction between the two. Where my people dwell, Goshen, they're going to be protected, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. Thus I will put a division between my people and your people. Yet again, there is a distinction between God's people and those that are opposed to him. Tomorrow this sign shall happen. And the Lord did so. There came great swarms of flies into the house of Pharaoh and into his servants' houses. Throughout all the land of Egypt, the land was ruined by the swarms of flies. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, "Go sacrifice to your God within your land." He's trying to negotiate with Moses. "No, y'all don't need to go away and sacrifice. You need to do it here in Egypt." But Moses said, "It would not be right to do so. For the offerings we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God are an abomination to the Egyptians." Again, an attitude for us to adopt and to put deep into our hearts is to realize that our worship of God is offensive to those that are not a part of God's people, those that are in the Christian community and those that are outside of the Christian community. Those outside of the Christian community don't exactly like the type of worship that we do. They are offended and they're bothered by the things that we do. And indeed, the Egyptians were bothered by the way that the Israelites worshiped. So Moses says, "If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he told us." We're going to do it that way. So Pharaoh said, "I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only you must not go very far away. Stay close by. Plead for me, pray for me, ask for these flies to go. I'll let you go worship the Lord, but just make sure you don't go far away." Then Moses said, "Behold, I'm going out from you, and I will plead with the Lord that the swarms of fly may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only let not Pharaoh cheat again by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord." So apparently this negotiation is okay. Just don't go far away. Go. Pray that these flies will go, and then I'll let you go in sacrifice. Of course, Pharaoh is not going to keep his end of the bargain. So Moses went out from Pharaoh, prayed to the Lord. Again, as we were reminded yesterday, you need to pray for your enemies. That is what Moses does for Pharaoh. And the Lord did as Moses asked. and remove the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. Not one remained, but what happened? Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also and did not let the people go. I pray that has been a blessing to you, and I'll see you all in the next video.